Scene starts in the middle of road. Group of people standing in the middle of road. Our main female protagonist is narrating her story. I'd like to start things off by saying that I used to be an ordinary graduate student. Away from my professors day in and day out. It seemed so unfair to just die like that. But then I came to life. Not only did I wake up to find myself inside the silly romance novel that I'd been reading before I died. I had been reincarnated into the body of the villainess meets a horrible death at the end of the story. What should I do? If things continue like this, then the two male leads. I am going to end up dying like earlier in this life too, just like my past life. The saint is coming from heaven. It is truly a blessing from heaven. Of course, Lady Syria is also blessed by God, so she will soon shake off the cold. She will always be healthy. The priest's virtues were mild. Her face was full of joyful expressions. Saint. Oh, isn't that your fiance, Lady Syria? The priest was right. Next to Lena was a handsome man with light brown hair that stood out from afar. Callus strode towards Lena's side, and she smiled brightly as she greeted him. Lena's laughter was clearly seen from this terrace, which was quite far off his coat and wrapped it around Lena's shoulders. Syria felt a little strange at that sight. That bastard. He was Syria's fiance. He abandoned Syria only 1 week before their wedding. Should I go down and pull their hair out? But if I do that, will I not die? You have been on the terrace all day with the patient. At that time, Syria and the priest looked reflexively towards the origin of the voice they heard. Syria rose from her seat while the priest hurriedly bowed her head. Your Highness the Grand Duke Lescheberg. His red eyes looked at the priest as if they were covered in blood. His cold eyes were dark and full of irritation. Lady Syria, wasn't it outrageous to have your fiancé call the priest when your worsening cold was due to spending all day on the terrace? This man was never concerned about Syria's health. It was just a nuisance to not have enough priests on his own estate and had to ask more from the temple instead. I'm sorry, Your Highness. He stared at Syria and turned his gaze as he spoke to the priest. Take her to the temple as soon as possible. In my opinion, she should stay here a little longer for stability. Your Highness. The priest quickly followed along the Duke, who walked away after he said his piece. Syria didn't care much. Because he is the main character. He is cold now, but in the future, he will change and look at the heroine with honey dripping from his eyes. That was the fate of the male protagonist and the ending of the original story. Syria. She thought about the title of the novel that she had read. We're actually characters in a romance novel about a dimension-jumping heroine named Lena, who falls into another world and is showered with love by the primary and secondary male characters. Syria was originally an ordinary graduate student. When she woke up one day, she had possessed a character in the novel she was reading. She couldn't tell how she died or how she got over it. It was hard for her to remember what she had forgotten. The important thing was about Syria Stern, the person she possessed. Syria Stern was the biggest villain in the novel. Similar to her name in reality. But that didn't stop her from committing depravities as if she had some sort of fetish for being wicked. If asked to choose one of the most popular villains in the world of Imperial society, 100 out of 130 people would choose her as a villain. A cold attitude unlike her flawless appearance, and a tendency to pour champagne over others' heads. Of course, there was a natural sense of inferiority in the victim. Syria was a young maiden of the prestigious Marquis Kelliden family in the West, but her mother was a humble actress. Has she mentioned that her mother was a commoner? However, she was a beauty. Thanks to this, Syria, who inherited her mother's blood, was also a great beauty with bright green hair and icy blue eyes. The relationship with the family was also the worst. However, the day Syria turned 15, the situation changed. It was revealed that Syria was a person with divine power. So what happened? Syria took the title of Stern from the temple as her last name, and left Marquis Kellyden, and went to the capital to enjoy a luxurious life. But around a year or so, Syria changed. Since Syria was in possession of the villainess's body. After all, this novel was unique in only a few parts of the setting. The other characters and relationships were thoroughly cliché. I don't want to die. I'd already met an untimely demise in my last life. So I didn't want to die in vain again this time around. So before main character Lena arrive, I have to make things right for my better future. First I started apologizing to people I have hurt. Then sensing gifts to get's favors. As Syria, she was honestly afraid of Callus. Just thinking about how vivid the scene of killing Syria with a knife in the original was bone-chilling. Besides, the fact that Callus's arm got injured was caused by something related to Syria, so he hated her even more. However, she found him alive, and she prayed and healed his arm. Because she read the original story, so she knew how Lena healed his arm. She won the favor of the person who killed her most cruelly. She didn't know he would confess his love to her. In fact, she wondered if all it took was to fix one's injured arm to make people fall in love. Nevertheless, she began to like Callus more, who confessed to her recklessly. So, the heroine will fall in love with the male protagonist, and everyone gets a happy ending. And instead Callus committed suicide. Wouldn't this be better? This could be an improvement, a perfect tweak to the storyline. Syria thought it was the perfect ending. Especially for her as the innocent villainess. Scene shifts. Syria went to designer Begonia Boutique for her wedding dress fitting. There she encountered Lena. Syria is surprised. Lena, wow, Callus' fiance. Lena's eyes glistened with a smile. Then she suddenly grabbed Syria's hand. No, rather. Did Callus give Lena permission to call him by his name already? It took Syria 11 months to get permission to call his name. As expected, where does the blood of the second male leads go? Lena spoke with a twinkle in her eyes. I'm Lena. It's an embarrassing title, but they call me a saint. Syria gently pushed Lena's hand away and said, Of course I know, saint lady. Lena looked around the living room without worrying about it. I heard you are tailoring your wedding dress today. Is that right? That's right. Oh my gosh. A wedding dress from another world. I was really curious if anyone wears wedding dresses here, said Lena, whose eyes lit up. Can I see it with you? See it together? It was a strange request. First of all, a wedding dress wasn't supposed to be seen by anyone but close family members or close friends, and Lena wasn't in any of those categories. However, before Syria could speak, Begonia opened her mouth first. Saint, I'm sorry, but trying on a wedding dress is not a spectacle. Ugh. Lena was surprised and immediately folded her hands together. However, she was not as tactless as in the original story. Sorry. I didn't mean that. Because I don't know this world very well. Indeed, Lena was a God-sent saint. Begonia was reminded of that, and spoke with a gentle smile. Of course. But, can you go out for a moment? What? But, I can't work if there is an outsider here. I hope Saint Lady understands. All right. Lena went out with a look of despair. She looked back several times with a lingering look on her face, but Begonia was firm. So, in the original story, Lena saw Begonia's dress, and fell in love at first glance. But she became very sad when she heard that statement. Eventually, Callus was angered enough to put pressure on Begonia's store from behind the shadows. He was the biggest importer of silk after all. In the end, Begonia stepped back and surrendered. So Begonia turned out as a designer who also became a villain. However, no villain could match Syria Stern. The original story with its plot twist was a delightful development, but since Syria was reborn as the villain, only tears flowed. Scene shifts. What do you mean, you want to change designers? I heard what happened at the wedding dress fitting. You should know it as well since you were there too. Saintess Lena descended from heaven, so of course, she was different from other nobles. Begonia didn't understand and threw her out with harsh words. Begonia didn't say anything bad. She didn't? Callous? Yes. She informed Saintess Lena that a dress fitting was not a spectacle. Nobles found it rude to do so. Or, did Saintess Lena say something else? Callus's forehead was slightly frowned. Saintess Lena told me similar words. But the situation? What is wrong with the situation? Damn it. Syria. Callus brushed his hair roughly. Do you like Begonia's dress that much? Of course I like it. But what made you upset, was not it? It can't be just about the dress. But yes. I like it. Then. I said I like it, so you can't be stubborn. But Lena. Callus stopped. Syria looked at him coldly. Did you call the saintess by her name? At Syria's question, Callus knew he made a mistake. He was her fiance, but he called the name of another woman so intimately, it was definitely something to be criticized for. I made a mistake. But Syria, please understand. It is because I have decided to be street. Lena's guardian. Oh really? Of course, Syria knew about it. In the original story, Syria Stern was unable to control her anger when Lena, who was anxious to crush her opponent, had a prosperous guardian named Callus Hanaton. At that time, Syria angrily rushed to the place where Lena was staying and threw a vase at her. Lena was hurt and Callus was greatly angered. And that was a shortcut for the villain to fall. So this time, to avoid history repeating itself, Syria smiled and yielded. I understand. Callus looks relieved. Good. I was afraid that you would get angry. Then sleep well, my dear fiance. Callus kissed her forehead and smiled. It was a warm smile that was familiar to her. The next day Callus and Syria had an appointment for lunch but... Callus, I'm sorry Syria. Apparently Lena's divine powers have run amok again. I must attend to her immediately. Syria in anger, it hasn't even full day since you took her last name like that, you son of bitch. She thought it's so hard to be a good person. I think I have got rough idea, why Syria lived as a villain. Lady Syria, you're paler than usual, do you feel unwell? I seem unwell? She responded meekly. I guess it's because I've caught a cold. My lady, it appears you suffer a cold every year. So it seems. Aliot, head of the Knights of the Berg family. He was also the first person who opened up her heart and helped her a lot when she became a humble Syria. What did he say to her? Self-reflecting was not a bad thing. I was just trying to survive. He said I was naive because people always wield their swords. How do I live in this harsh world if I was so naive? But where are you going? Did I make a mistake for the time, sir? Is it time for the glacier check? Yes. Would someone with a cold go to a frozen lake in the winter? It is enough that you have gone every day until today. Winter is not over yet. Well within House of Berg's dominion. There was an unusual lake in the Berg estate. The frozen lake, the glacier, was the grave of the beast. It was too wide to be called a lake. To some extent, the end was invisible. Periodically checking the boundaries of this glacier was the responsibility of the Berg family for generations, and for some reason, a woman with the surname Stern was essential, causes they require the power of the gods wielded by streams to do so. Thanks to this, Stern was treated dearly. Actually, the number of Stern was very small. It was also the basis for Syria's defeat. It was a pretty important place in the original. Particular, a week or so after the arrival of the female protagonist Lena, those days were most important. On the day she was supposed to check the lake on its regular basis, Syria suddenly refused to go. Of course, it was because of Lena, the heroine. Suddenly, Lena appeared as a saintess and took her attention away. If I want to solidify my position and survive this, then I've got to properly carry out all of my duties as a stern knight. Why don't we finish here for the day and head back? Syria, shall we? Then a voice came. Lady Syria. Your Grace. Syria also looked back right away. She was surprised and her eyes widened instantly. Lesky Berg, the owner of this estate and the male protagonist of the original story. He was striding in the fog. He wore a large sword and a unique red cloak. That Syria flinched a little at the sight. He went over to her and Aliot in turn and asked, What are you doing here? Your Highness. I was checking the lake with Lady Syria. Lesky's expression was slightly distorted at Aliot's answer. Yes, it was distorted. Why? Why are you doing that? That was what he meant. She trembled a little, reading the expression of the male lead. What did she do wrong? Does he dislike the clothes she wore? Lesky looked at her and spoke. Lady Syria stern. Yes, Your Grace. Is my words not of any importance to you? Yes? Syria was so nervous. She didn't understand a word he said. Why did you come to the lake with a cold in winter? My cold is not severe. And this is what I have to do as stern. Since when did Lady Stern faithfully obey her duty? He saw right through her intentions, perhaps because he was the male lead. Even though she has gone out to check the glacier every day after coming to this castle, Lesky still looked at her with disbelief. Or, are you trying to draw attention from your fiance with a more severe cold? She could feel Aliot looking at Lesky with horror. If Lesky had not been his lord, he would have caught the counterattack right away. Take it easy, Aliot. If you die, I'll die too. Syria thought to herself. Your Highness. She answered as calmly as possible. That thought hasn't crossed my mind. And even if I get frostbite, I won't call the priest anymore. Lesky asked back in a sarcastic voice. Will your fiancé listen to that? Probably. Callus seems to be busy with Lena. Because of that saintess? It was an unexpected, but accurate understanding of the situation. Is Marquis Callus Hanaton having an affair with an unknown saintess? At the moment, her two hands, which were politely gathered, trembled. As if Lesky already knew the answer, he also knew she was embarrassed. He said nothing else. After a moment of silence, he turned back and looked at Aliot. Aliot. Yes, Your Grace. Are you done checking the lake? Yes. Thanks to the hard work of Lady Syria Stern, we have checked it. He deliberately praised her in front of Lesky. Syria pledged to call Aliot an angel starting today. While Lesky looked at the far end of the lake for a moment, Syria stared at him on the side. She knew for sure. He is a real male protagonist. His pure white silver hair suited well with this snowy field. But he had such a cold and irritating manner of talking. Nevertheless, his face was the reason why there were so many ladies who yearned for him. He had a very dazzling appearance. That's all? Yes, Your Highness. Aliot, angel, first moved to the side where the horses were bound. The moment she tried to go along with him, the warmth that wrapped around her body instantly solidified. Then she realized what's happening. Lesky had taken off his coat and wrapped them around her shoulders. It would be good for your precious Stern's body to not catch a cold. Then, before Syria could give her thanks, Lesky moved his long legs and began to stride away. She blinked blankly for a moment, then hurriedly followed him. She thought, what is all this after those harsh remarks? He liked me more than I thought. Still, it'd probably be best to avoid him as much as possible. There's something about him. He's the scariest out of all of them. Not to mention the way he talks. I just want the wedding to wrap up as soon as possible so I can get out of this place. There's only one reason why I'm staying at House Burke's palace right now. Sterns are considered to be such holy figures within the empire that they can only take part in certain important rites, such as the exchanging of wedding vows, at a limited number of locations. One of those is House Berg's dominion, which guard the frozen lake. I wanted to avoid holding wedding here at all cost because Inn is the original place where the wedding ceremony of the heroine and the male lead was held at the end. In the ending scene of the novel, Lena and Lesky were married at the Berg estate. The reason was because Lena was actually a Stern. No wonder the original Syria was so jealous of her. Well, the fact that Lena is actually a Stern is only revealed at the very end. If I just get married and then quietly make my exit, I should be fine. It was a novel for the female protagonist. All settings were arranged. Suddenly a voice rang, and she looked up. Lady Syria. A bright smile naturally blossomed. Are you back? Yes, I've just returned. Abigail Orion. Her nickname was Bibi. She was Syria's bodyguard, who had a friendly smile and warm eyes. Syria asked, whispering into Abigail's ear. You didn't kill anyone, did you? Oh my God. Abigail smiled gently and whispered. I told you I won't kill anyone unless they are criminals. Abigail Orion, the Aben Knight. She was actually a former assassin, a prisoner who was almost executed by the temple. She swore to be Syria's loyal knight forever, but her past was very colorful. Bibi, how was the battle to defeat the beast? It was the same as always. I missed you, the constellation armor was cold like ice. Syria, thought I knew I should have gone along. Constellation armor. One of the significant reasons for Stern's existence. The armor was needed to deal with the beasts that emitted magic. It was called the star armor, or constellation. If she didn't wear the armor, her whole body would quickly become addicted to magic. If she missed the time of treatment, she would eventually die, leaving stains on her body. In order to prevent this, the star armor was regarded as a staple of the knights. However, the keystone in the armor was a divine metal from God, and the longer it was in contact with the human body, the more the temperature of the keystone decreased exponentially. Stern was the only one who could offset this. If Stern was absent for a long time, the person who wore the armor would feel their whole body getting colder and later froze to death. It was akin to being put into a freezer alive. We should hurry up, lad. You are liable to catch cold. Syria thought about how Duke was also concerned. I have to solidify my usefulness somehow, before Lena realize what she is. She shakes her head and said, Bibi, let's go in, I want to hear all. What happened? Lena, who was in upper room, she got close to the window to look outside as it was noise. Lady Syria has changed a lot since a year ago. The number of times she appeared at balls and parties were gradually decreasing. But that didn't mean she completely left the social world and went into seclusion. She was slowly changing her routine to convince others. Lena from Viscount Isaac, why does Callus' fiance visit Glacier every day? He reply, because she is a Stern. Only Stern can purify the lake's barrier. She's been earning praise throughout the palace recently for her diligence in carrying out her duties. While looking at Syria, Lena said, I envy her. V stunned. The title Stern, can't I get it? Lena said. He said but you are already Saintess, my lady. Lena replied, but Stern sound more dashing. The glacier can only be purified using a Stern's magic, so everyone in the palace is so interested in her. Even with my divine power, I can't do that. Saintess will also receive a very splendid reception in half a year. Of course, you are to learn all the social etiquettes before that. I am so envious. It will be Lady Syria's birthday soon. Winter Wednesday. When the priest who gave Syria the medicine for the cold laughed, Abigail nodded. Time flies so fast. I see. I was so busy that I forgot about it. A Wednesday in winter. A person must meet several conditions in order to be bestowed with such a title. There was such a song in the temple. Monday's child is fair of face. Tuesday's child is full of grace. Wednesday's child is full of woe. Thursday's child has far to go. Friday's child is loving and giving. Saturday's child works hard for a living. And the child that is born on the Sabbath day is bonny, attractive, and blithe, happy, and good and gay, cheerful. Isn't it too unfair to all the children born on Wednesday? If only she got a penny every time she was sad. Syria Stern was born on a winter Wednesday. On the day of her 15th birthday, a small star-shaped dot appeared on her white neck. She possessed divine power and officially became a Stern. That was the explanation in the original story. Although Stern's divine power was completely different from that of the divine powers of the priest. She said that it was because Sterns were rare, and did not make a distinction, that she immediately abandoned her father family name, and began proudly using her new title in its place. Because of that, her already poor relationship with her family grew even worsen. The conversation that led to her birthday suddenly turned to Lena. My lady, that I think about it, Saintess seems to have much interest in the sacred relic, and I must say that it's very concerning. Saintess, wouldn't it be dangerous since her divine powers are not stabilized? Syria said. I told her that, but she is still very curious. It was the same in the original story. Lena was a lively and lovely classic female protagonist, and she was also curious. As a result, several incidents arose in the middle of the story. She had laid her hands on the sacred relic, the rare keystone that was known to only react to a Stern's touch. After Lena came in contact with the holy stone, the divine power of the Sterns that had remained dormant within her awakened. And Lena, being critically hurt once was enough for Lesky, the male lead, to become aware of his feelings. I should try not to worry too much about it. Once the wedding is over, I just need to go live quietly in House Hannington's dominion. Until the rest of the story plays out. At least, that's what I was planning to do. Scene shifts now. Syria is in Green Garden Vault. It doesn't matter how many times I have seen these silver laurel boughs. Unlike ordinary laurel branches, these silver leaves sparkled silver. It was said that pure silver, salt, soft iron, and flame-burned sage herbs purified the space. These silver tree branches purified the glacier, the grave of the beast, and further binding the barrier. Since it was not enough to reduce the temperature of the star armor keystone, the knights in the absence of Stern used to carry silver branches as substitutes. If Stern became a plant, it would be just like a silver tree. If she put a branch of a silver tree in the snowfield of a glacier and came to see it after a while, it would be completely dead. Therefore, the probability of demons appearing significantly decreased the more often new silver branches were inserted during the inspection. Of course, this was a work that ordinary Sterns didn't like very much. Winter's glacier was very cold with the cold of the north. But Syria didn't hate it. While Syria was leaving the place, she suddenly bumped into someone. Ouch! When she raised her head, she saw Duke was there. Duke, you appear in quite high spirit, Lady Syria. Your Grace, greetings. In low voice, why did out of all people it has to be him? Damn, my all branches fall. Duke bent on his knees and helps Syria to collect them all. Thank you, Your Highness. Syria said thank you, and as she turned away, she heard Lesky's voice from behind. Are you going to the glacier today? Yes, Your Highness. Sir Elliot decided to go. I don't understand. Yes? Lesky looked at her with an expression like he was seeing a rare creature. I am aware that Linen took care of your wedding hall meticulously. Is it still lacking of some sorts? What do you mean? I doubt there's any actual need to double-check the glacier. Didn't you work hard in hopes of that? Whenever you came to the castle, if you didn't like something, you would scream. Lesky said with an indifferent expression. You never did that in front of me, but more than 100 servants said they were sick serving you. Cold sweat running down her face. What did the original Syria do that caused more than 100 servants to suffer? That's why she was glad that she could make this awkward smile right away. I will check harder to compensate for the 100 people who suffered last time. That day, when she checked the glacier through the cold, she felt much better than usual. When she got back to the room, an unexpected gift was waiting for her. My lady, your wedding gift just arrived. Take a look. The two maids assigned to her were excited. Weren't all the gifts organized yesterday? This is a new one from Marquis Hannington. From Callis? Yes. Look, this sapphire is really clear and very rich in color. Besides, silk ribbons made by a capital designer, and shabo, a lady's hat with ribbon and lace hanging on a wide brim, with tail feathers of a precious bird. Hearing the male lead say that, feels like I've been given some sort of guarantee that I'll make it through all this. It seems like I am miles away from the doomed ending. Now I can finally focus on the wedding. Here, my lady, I have prepared the bracelet that you spoke about. Callis has given me so much. I'd like to return the favor by giving him something before the ceremony. You're going to give that to Marquis Callis, aren't you, my lady? Isn't this very valuable? Syria? Yes. The only thing that was good was an amethyst bracelet. It was very valuable until Lena found it later. It's an amethyst bracelet. After taking good care of the bracelet, Syria was currently spending time and drinking tea with Abigail and the priest. Knock. Knock. There was an urgent knock on the door. Then the door popped open with a swish. Priest? We're in trouble. It's a catastrophic. Calm down. What is it? The saintess has fallen. My lady. What? She collapsed after touching the constellation's steel monument. Not only that, the monument itself turned transparent and began to shine. Syria thought, that means a new stern has appeared, according to story. Scene shifts to Lena's bedchamber. Syria doubted her ears for a moment. That only meant one thing. Lena was found to be a stern. The villain lived quietly trying to save her life, but why did it happen so fast? It was still in the early parts of the original story, so how could this happen? Moreover, unlike the original, Lena hadn't stabilized her divine power yet. She could really die. Suddenly Syria got goosebumps. What if the heroine dies? What will happen to the original story? However, there was no way to know. This was something Syria had never thought about. Duke arrive. What about Saintess? She has just escaped death. Fortunately, the Grand Duke and Marquis Hannington were in the castle. That's a relief. With a sigh of relief, the priest saw Lesky standing at the door and hurried up to greet him. Thank you, Your Highness. I greet you on behalf of those who worship God. Syria saw Callis beside Lena. She thought, come to think of it, he didn't even notice that I am here. Priests who would have thought that Saintess would also be a stern. She will surely stay in the Berg estate and watch the glacier. Duke had a rare gentle expression. Lady Syria. Yes, Your Highness? She stopped immediately to respond to the Duke's call. Did Lady Stern suffer like that when you appeared as Stern? No. I'm not as sacred as a saintess. My divine power is nowhere near to hers. The influence of the sacred relic increases the amount of divine power. Duke frowned at Syria's answer. She was startled and bowed her head thinking. Priest? Duke's red eyes turned to the priest who just signed his signature. Viscount, tell me what you said earlier? Why did the saint touch the relic? Well, Saintess Lena. Viscount Isaac glanced at Syria. She has a vague admiration for Lady Stern. That answer seemed to have taken Lady Syria aback. Vague admiration? So, was he saying that Lena touched the relic on her own decision? Because Lena adored her? She wanted to check if she was a Stern? Why all of a sudden? All kinds of questions went through her head. Your Highness. Viscount Isaac knelt on one knee. He was also a proud nobleman who received the 5th rank, but he could not deal with Grand Duke Leski. No one thought it was too much even if he kneeled like that. Viscount Isaac said with a pale face, "It's all my fault." However, Leski was expressionless. It was cold and scary somehow. Did she really touch it because she admires me? Or could it be that she wanted to check if she was a stern? In the book, Lena accidentally came into contact with Constellation Steel. Her divine power bursted forth with such force that it nearly killed her. Then does this mean she touched it on purpose this time? Out of admiration for Syria? That's so different from original. Your Grace, the Saintess has awake. Lenin Rouge. Duke Chief Aide. Duke. Good, let us be on the way then. Duke wants to leave the place as soon as possible. Your Majesty. Still, if you go in once, it's good for your relationship with the high priests. Quote. Am I a babysitter? For that matter. Duke sighed with an annoyed expression. Shall we go call on her together, lad Syria? After all, she is now your fellow stern. He seemed to think about it briefly, then went in, and the priest followed him in right after. There was Callus in the bedroom. To be precise, he was sitting at the bedside where Lena was lying, holding her hand. Callus. Yes. Lena. It's me. Are you awake? Callus grabbed Lena's hand tightly. Syria's gaze was fixed on those two hands. It hurts. You will be okay now. Don't worry. Lena. His soothing voice comforted her. Shall I cut their hands off? Bibi said. Huh? Syria was bewildered after listening to her casual words. Duke, you know priest, Berg Castle is very busy in winter. I can't afford these kinds of accidents in the castle anymore. Leinen, as soon as the Saintess is able to move, return her to the temple. Yes. Your Highness. Your Highness. Upon hearing that, Callus jumped up, calling out Duke's name. He was very angry. Syria felt his anger more than anyone because she was very good at reading Callus's expression. Your Highness, aren't you too much? She's sick not because she wants to. Do you have to say that in front of the patient? Duke made a sarcastic expression. Can't I speak my way in my own castle? Still, it's too much. Street. Lena is a patient. You're right, she's a patient, he said while making a gesture towards Syria. Your fiance is not in good shape either. Don't you think you're taking care of the wrong person? Callus paused for a moment. Then, Duke continued speaking. Some might think your fiancé is the Saintess and not Syria Stern. Now finally Syria break down her clam face in front of everyone, which looked like she is about to cry. She can't imagine instead of her, who should be angry at Callus for tending to another woman, not Rouge Burke, the way she never allowed herself to get angry even once, and just stood by quietly through everything, all for the sake of avoiding real Syria's fate in the story. It's so embarrassing, she want to go back home. Breck break the silence of the room, and stated, it's been a long time since Stern's wedding, the vows should be sacred. Leski looked at Callus, who couldn't say anything, and spoke. Duke told her, that the saint requires tranquility, so we should go. Callus tried to stop her. The moment he left Lena's hand and tried to approach her, Callus called her name and she looked back. When their eyes met, Callus's eyes were filled with strange anger, but Lena started wheezing and called Callus. His attention immediately diverted towards Lena again as if she did this on purpose. Duke escorted Syria and she left the room with heavy heart. Cut to the next day. Syria was in a warehouse called the Vault of the Greenhouse, since it was a place to select and store only various expensive and valuable items necessary for the identification of silver branches for glacier inspection. It was very rare for people to come in as only those with permission could enter. Somehow that made her feel comfortable. As usual, she picked up a silver tree branch to test it. She had low spirit because what happened at last night. The image of Callus, who looked pitifully at Lena, kept hovering in front of her eyes. Then a voice approached her. Lady Syria Stern. The voice she heard was familiar. She was startled and looked back. Your Highness,
It was Duke Lesky. He walked her out to the hallway yesterday. Since the situation yesterday was awkward, she didn't know what to say and how to express her gratitude. Duke asked, "About what happened yesterday, are you able to do a proper inspection today? If you go to the glacier just for an escape, it is better to do it in an outbuilding." Her hand, which was holding the silver branch, weakened. "Don't worry, I'll check the glacier as meticulously as usual. I will never be neglectful. I am stern after all." When Duke was about to say something, a familiar voice came from behind. "Syria, are you here?" It was Callis. Before she turned around, Duke spoke first. "Marquis Callis Hainton, it seems that my presence is so insignificant for you to not notice me here." Callis' response, "Excuse my impertinence, Your Highness. I haven't seen my fiance for a while, so I've been looking for her. But I didn't know she would be here with His Highness. It's a rare place to be in." As Callis said, only Duke and Syria were there. However, the way he said it as if there was a problem. The Duke replied, "Marquis Hainton, who gave you permission to enter here?" Duke Lesh's voice sank threateningly. "I have never given you access to the vault." Unlike Syria and the castle's owner, Lesky, Callis had never been granted access to this vault. It was a very sensitive problem among ordinary nobles, and not to mention the nature of the Grand Duchy. "Berg," Callis replied, "I'm sorry, Your Highness. I lost my temper for a moment and made excuses." Callis apologized in a stiff voice. "When I return, I will pay the usual compensation immediately. Otherwise, if you are displeased with the amount, please tell me, I will be happy to pay." Duke continued, "Oh, will you? You've got a lot of nerves." "I'm not," Callis replied. "You seem to be mistaken." Lesky stared at Callis with a cold look. "The punishment is not something you can decide. It follows the traditional punishment of Berg." "Then the traditional punishment is?" Callis inquired. "Cut off one wrist. Can you do it?" Callis glared at Lesky. "I didn't know you wanted my wrist. Do you want to declare a war between provinces?" Callis said firmly. "I think war is what you want. Not me," Lesky spoke. The atmosphere of the two became harsh enough to cross the level of danger. It felt like a real war would happen soon. A war in the middle of winter would definitely cause numerous casualties and mortalities to both sides. With 2 fingers, Syria gently pulled the sleeves of Duke's shirt. The 2 pairs of eyes shrunk towards her hand at the same time. She spoke, "Your Highness, even though my fiancé has done a great deal of rudeness, it would be too harsh for the knights who have to look after the winter glacier if we wage war on something like this. I beg you to give Stern the generosity and let it go once." Lesky raised his eyebrows. She continued, "My fiancé will swear that he will never do this again. He will politely apologize, right, Callis?" Callis looked at her blankly and slowly bowed his head to Lesky. "You have a great fiancé." He spoke shortly with that usual expressionless face, then quickly turned around and went out. Callis looks at Syria as she committed a crime, and in a cold tone asks her to have a word. Syria don't want to talk, but Callis approached her. He said, "How can you run off on your own like this? You took hold of the Archduke's clothing so indiscreetly, and now you're behaving horribly and delicately simply because you're angry." Syria turned back, and replied, "You mean I am acting horrible indiscreetly?" Callis asked her calm down, and tried to explain. "Lena is a sick person. She's God's representative from a completely different world, with no one else to rely on but me. Can't you understand that much?" "I understand," she replied. He continued, "Do you got angry, grabbed another man's arm and went out without even looking at me. You did all that first with Saintess Lena," she replied. He kept babbling. "Lena was sick. How is it the same? Her head seemed to be steaming." "It's different. At least I didn't call the Grand Duke by name in front of people." At the moment, Callis knew he made a mistake. "Let me go," she shouts. "Syria," he took her name and tried to grab her hand. She twisted her hand and tried to get out of Callis's grasp, but it was no use. He was being unreasonable. Eventually, anger soared to her head. She clenched her other hand and hit it hard on the wooden shelf next to her. Bang! With a loud sound that seemed to hurt, Callis's eyes widened, called her name, "Syria." He was shocked at her red, swollen hand. She was so angry. She didn't even feel the pain right now. He nervously asked why she went her anger on the tree and hurt herself. She took his name, Callis. Her hand throbbed slowly. "If I were you," she said, staring at Callis, I would break up this marriage and propose to Saintess Lena. What? Callus's face distorted. What do you mean? You are the woman I love. She shouts. Who would hold another woman's hand in front of his supposed beloved fiance? Syria. She knew that Lena didn't love him. So why, after she possessed the body of the original Syria, she struggled to live for a long time? Syria loved Callus. At first, in order to live she healed his injured arm, but she couldn't resist Callus, who slowly let down his vigilance and became friendly with her. It was a sense of duty at first, but it became increasingly difficult to control her attraction to him. If there was a happy ending for the main leads, wouldn't it be fair for the supporting characters to be a little happy? She rationalized it like that and did not guard her heart. In the end, one day, Callus knelt and proposed to her. He was devoted to the heroine but wasn't chosen by her and ended up committing suicide. She then finally reveals how she feels. When she sees Lena beside him, she feels terrified. Syria, Callus's angry voice quickly subsided. I made you cry. I'm really sorry. It's my fault. He then proceeded to hug her and wiped her tears away. Let's go to my estate immediately after the wedding ceremony. It's a beautiful place. After this treatment, I will never see Saintess Lena again, and I will vow to be faithful husband, so please don't cry. After a few minutes, Syria calmed down. Then she felt mortified. She has no choice but to keep her faith in him. Because it was the most easy way to avoid Syria's death, she jokingly said, don't be a late wedding. He replied, I would never do such thing. They both finally laugh. After a few times, Callus went to Lena. Callus approached her and sighed, today will be the last time we call each other's names. Lena's eyes wide open. She asked, could this have something to do with your betrothed? Was scolded by Viscount Isaac. I also heard a few words from Lady Syria's priest about it. Do we have to refer to each other as Marquis Haneton and Saint Lena? That is correct, and it will be difficult for us to continue to meet after the wedding, he replied. She lowered her head, said, you are my dear friend. Transparent tears shone in Lena's eyes. It would have been nice if we met earlier. Callus said nothing. Suddenly, Lena noticed a bracelet with a magic crystal in a hexagonal shape on his wrist. She inquired about it. He told her it was a gift from Syria. She then stated that she wanted to be friends with Syria. Callus again reminds her that it is a breach of etiquette to refer to someone you are not close to by their first name. She shouts, etiquette, etiquette. Whatever I do, it's always etiquette, etiquette. Eventually, Lena burst into tears. Can't you see me holding it in? I'm scared to go to the temple, and I'm afraid of losing a precious friend like you. Do you know how many times my world is changing now? You said you were my guardian. You said you would protect me forever. Was that all a lie? I was happy enough with that. But why? Tears streamed down from her eyes. Callus panicked, trying to wipe away Lena's tears. However, he stopped and squeezed his hand. Lena cried out in tears. He thought she was right. It must be hard for her. At least this last moment before separation he should be by his side. They both sat side by side. Lena then spoke, I want to visit Glacier too. The glacier? Why all of a sudden? He asked. She replied, I wanted to be friends with Syria. She gave excuse. I'm also a stern. If I go to the glacier, I can relieve Syria's burden, and we can get closer faster. He said, Lena, I know your good intentions, but you're not in good shape right now. She asks, are you saying that it's not possible? Then I will go alone. Lena. Eventually, Callus looked at Lena and sighed. Feeling defeated, he had a good grasp of her personality. She was a saintess under the protection of Marquis Hainton. If there was a problem with Lena's personal affairs, it would also affect him. And above all, today was the last day. He continued, all right, instead, we will just have a look and come right back. Lena was excited, and he said, let's sneak out and come back secretly. He thought this was really the last time. Scene shifts to Duke's office. So, you can't get in touch with him after he went out? His aide replied, yes, Your Highness. All contact with Marquis Hainton was cut off. I believe that a blizzard struck suddenly and they lost their way. Are they insane? Have Marquis Hainton gone crazy? Does he have any awareness that his wedding with Stern is 2 days away? Does he intend to allow Lady Syria to die? Lesky gritted his teeth. He knew how important and dangerous the wedding with Stern was. Punctuality and place compliance. If one of them was violated, Stern's divine power would explode like a firecracker in her body. Unable to overcome the shock, Stern would vomit blood and get injured, or die in more terrible cases. Because of that, Stern's wedding had to be in a designated place. Since Duke Lusky knew this, Callis must have known it as well. He was chosen as Stern's man after all. He shouldn't have done what he did, unless he had gone completely insane, and it would be difficult to understand the intentions of Saints from God. But he still went out. Duke Lusky thought that if he had known this, he would have knocked Callis out the first day he came to the manor and put him in a temporary prison in the castle. Lusky called Linen and gave some instructions, then suddenly looked out the window. One short moment later, his forehead frowned. This was because Syria Stern was seen in a search team with a number of lit torches. Is Lady Syria Stern going with search party? His aide replied yes, maybe she's worried about her fiance. He thought person who had been acting so audacious change like that in a year. Did she love Callis that much? Would a person change that much when she's in love? Lusky had an incomprehensible feeling. He ordered, tell Lady Syria Stern, she is not allowed to take a single step outside the castle. Yes, Your Highness, aide replied. After a short while, Syria was in her room as she wasn't allowed to step a foot outside. When Bibi arrived, she asked, did you find Callis? Syria looked at Bibi with some expectations, but she shook her head. Bibi informed her, the blizzard gets worse as it goes near the glacier, so we couldn't get in further anymore. With one wrong turn, the whole team could get lost. Really? Syria sighed. Bibi continued, half the search team returned to the castle, and the other half decided to set up barracks on the glacier and stay over. Bibi continued, my lady, I have a message from Grand Duke Berg to you. Can I say it here? Huh, yes. Bibi smiled when Syria nodded. Bibi told Duke words, I'll tie that bastard up with a rope and throw him into the wedding hall even if there's no news of him until the day of the wedding. Syria was shocked at the fact that Bibi was really reciting what she heard from Lusky. She even copied his tone and his deadly eyes. Lady Stern should be prepared in advance. The wedding will go on as scheduled no matter what. When the solemn declaration ended, Bibi's eyes returned to normal. That's what he said. I don't know why he said it so frightfully. Syria nodded. She wondered why Lusky told her that much. Because she knew she had to be in the wedding hall at the appointed time. She was repeatedly told about this at the temple. Stern's wedding was all about punctuality. She believed in Duke's words and Bibi agreed with her too. Now the scene cuts to the day of the Stern wedding. Lena and Callis, they take shelter in an abandoned cottage. It's much too dangerous to go out. Callis, you wouldn't possibly leave me here alone on my own, would you? She shouted like a brat. He replied, but there's hardly any time left before the ceremony. She again shouts on him. Wouldn't it be all right to postpone it for a day or two? Besides, there is no way you'd ever make it in time. He replied, I'm afraid that's not possible. Not when it comes to a Stern's nuptials, it cannot be postponed. Lena asked for an explanation for this, and then suddenly Callis vomited the blood. He realized the wedding had begun. He vomited more and more blood, muttered confusedly, Syria. The wedding hall on the day of the main ceremony was more beautiful than ever. Many priests who came here only for the wedding were gathered together like a choir. Their expressions were deep. Sighs of concern were occasionally heard, but Callis didn't come. In the wedding hall without the groom, Syria stood alone in front of the altar. Fortunately, the guest seats were full. No, actually she didn't know if it was fortunate or unfortunate. A bride, standing alone in an empty space, would have been a laughingstock. Guest whisper, I just hope the rumors about him and Saint Lena aren't true. On said, that isn't the problem right now. If he didn't came, then Stern divine powers will get exploded, and Syria will die. Hearing this, Bibi got angry on guest and asked what they are talking about. Bibi and Syria don't know if Stern wedding vows aren't fulfilled by both the partner, they both will die. Suddenly someone shouts Lady Syria. She collapses on the floor and can't figure out what is happening. She coughs blood. Bibi came running towards her, but the priests grabbed her arms and held her back. No, you can't touch her. Bibi shouts, are you crazy? The lady is covered in blood. She replied, it's Stern's ritual. If you touch her and something goes wrong, her divine power might cause more harm. The priests said nothing was wrong, until the wedding was over. Stern could not be touched except for those who had finished the covenant ceremony. It was an unwritten rule. The same was true if an accident happened on the day of the wedding, and even if she seemed like dying from bleeding, no one could touch her, because if there was a contact, her divine power could go wrong and she would go crazy. Now she understood the words of the priests, who had been demanding that the wedding be punctual. Priest shouts, "When is Marquis Hainton coming? Gather all of Stern's insignia, I'll do whatever I can with my divine power." At some point, Syria was lying on the podium. She thought she had somehow avoided the tragic ending of the original story. But was this how she was supposed to die? It couldn't be helped because Syria Stern was a villain, but she had never even disturbed the main characters. She had never even coveted them. She muttered, "I'm still a villain. What did I do wrong?" Tears trickled down her cheeks. The finally Grand Duke Lesky arrived. He knelt down in front of her and removed the veil that was covering her face. "No, Your Highness, you must not touch Lady Stern." The cries of the priests deafened the ears. "Is it going to solve any problem by watching her die?" Lesky shouted loudly and looked down at her. "Lady Syria Stern." She looked up blankly at the man, and he spoke, "Get hold yourself, you can't die like this. Wouldn't it be too unjust for you to perish this way?" At Duke's words, Syria squeezed his arm and spoke, "Yes, Your Grace. Dying like this would be much too pitiful." Then she lost her conscience and her hands fell down. Duke ordered priest to prepare for a commitment ceremony at once. Priest hesitate, he can't understand what Duke was thinking. Duke replied, "The Stern's wedding shall proceed as scheduled. Syria Stern will be saved by whatever means necessary." After a few times, "Please don't kill me so terribly. I want to live. I want to live. Don't kill me." Syria was having a nightmare. "Stern. Syria Stern." A voice woke up. Syria woke up with a cold sweat all over her body. The familiar ceiling caught her eyes. "Duke, and I really cannot understand you. Lady Syria. What on earth was happening in your dream to make you weep so?" It was the bedroom she had stayed in. Her eyes were wet. Did she cry in her sleep? She replied, she had a nightmare, in which she was dying. Duke asked, "Are you afraid of dying?" She responded, "Isn't everyone?" He continued, "Well, after all the things happened to you, I thought you aren't afraid of it." She then asked, "What about Callus?" Lesky looked cynical. He took the handkerchief and rubbed her forehead. She gets startled and asked, "Your Grace, what are you doing?" He replied, "I wonder if you have a memory loss. Don't you remember what happened at the wedding?" She did not remember seeing Callus at the end of the wedding. The only thing she remembered was Lesky Berg. She then thought, did they both got married? She asked, "Did I marry you? And now we are husband and wife?" He slowly opened his mouth. Yes, the head of House Burke couldn't suffer the disgrace of losing a Stern. She continued, "Does that mean you were aware I could die before the ceremony?" He replied, "Yes, Stern weddings are extremely strict affairs. In order to prepare for the worst possible scenario, it's customary for them to remain unaware of such a possibility, but their fiancés are always informed. As it is, they would also be in danger if the ceremony were interrupted, since the Stern's divine power would become ensnarled." She asked, "Did you mean that Callus know that if he was late for the wedding, I might die?" Lesky looked away from her and said, "Yes." Soon after, Callus barged into Syria room. "Marquis Callus Hainton, you shouldn't come in here. The Grand Duke told us not to let anyone enter without permission." The maid informed him, but he was already in the room. Syria ordered them, "Everyone please leave. I have to talk to Marquis Hainton." "Syria." Callus strode over and grabbed her shoulders. His eyes were burning with anger. "How could you do this? How could you marry another man, the Grand Duke of Berg?" Syria gave a slap. Callus's cheek didn't turn as much as she expected. Her hand didn't have much strength. She then stated, "It was you who didn't come. Me marrying another man. That was entirely your doing, Callus. If it hadn't been for the Archduke, I would have died a horrible, agonizing death because of you. From the look on your face, you're wondering how I know that. You knew that I'd die if you were late, and yet you still was. It that you actually wanted me to die, about with Lena." With tears in his eyes he spoke, "Syria, please, we ran into misfortune. Was worried that you might get hurt. Syria, I even tried to leave when the blizzard was still raging. But I was late because I lost my consciousness at the door. You know you're the only woman I wanted to marry. The confession I made was not a lie. I really love you." Callus grabbed her hands hurriedly. Callus's voice didn't reach her ears, because a strange force was felt from his hand, which Syria had held unintentionally for a long time. It was similar to the divine power in her body, but there was a strange discomfort, as if facing the same pull of a magnet. Come to think of it, how is Callus alive? At the wedding hall, she foreshadowed a sure death, and she had learned that Stern and Stern's spouse would have the same ending. Come to think of it, her wedding was a tragedy, she was on the verge of death, and he should have faced the same result. Callus was the one who shared the sacred power with Stern, and there was no other Stern in this estate besides Lena. Since she was a God-sent holy woman, she could omit the holy water and the sacred water that was essential for the wedding. She asked, "Are you married to Lena?" Lena was also a Stern. "You chose to marry Lena. I guess that's why you were alive, and in much better shape than I am." She didn't know what expression she had while looking at Callus. However, since she was trembling with a sense of betrayal, she might have an awful look on her face. Syria was a villain, but she was a perfect aristocrat, and she didn't want to change at once and get suspicious. But at this moment she felt it was useless to keep up with such things. She almost died even though she had been trying to live nicely. She continued, "I was vomiting blood and didn't even think about anyone else but you until I was about to die. But you already had a marriage with Lena to live. I don't want to waste the time I have already spent liking you, Callus." Callus's face was shocked. Then he spoke in a pleading tone. "Syria, you can be mad at me, but my marriage was a temporary marriage, and you married the Grand Duke temporarily too. Am I wrong? Let's divorce, both of us will get a divorce and get married again. I'll prepare the grandest wedding ever. We can start from the beginning. We have time." "So, time?" She glared into Callus's swaying eyes. "All you need is time, even if she has time now. What's the point of that?" Syria wondered. She continued, "My feelings for you have already disappeared." She left the room. Callus followed her, and pleaded for discussion. He grabbed her injured hand, and she informed her that the Syria powers which he received from Lena is quite repulsive to her body, and she should leave her hand. But he didn't leave her hand and kept taking. Then Duke came. He ordered him to release her. He said, "Are you deaf now as well, Marquis Haneton?" He finally leave her hand, but her wound open again. Duke said he will call priest to heal her. But Callus interfered and spoke, "I will take her to priest." Duke asked in cold tone, "And why would you?" He replied, he and Syria were in middle of discussion. Then Duke asked from Syria, "What's Syria's should take her decision whose company she wants?" Without hesitating she replied, "And it seems I am beholden to you, your grace." He repeated, "Behold, and isn't such language rather excessive between spouses?" Then they both left for healing, and Callus was unable to repose anything and saw them leaving.